Thank you, Thomas. A provision tucked into a wide-ranging state reform bill will change who owns and maintains watershed dams across West Virginia. Our Chase Campbell talked with local officials and a state agency about what the transition will mean.
House Bill 5364, signed into law this spring and taking effect in June, requires local conservation districts to hand over ownership of watershed dams and flood control channels to the statewide West Virginia Conservation Agency. That change is raising concerns for the Little Kanawha Conservation District, which covers Wood, Ritchie, Calhoun, Roane, and Wirt counties. The district maintains 6 dams across that area, inspecting them at least twice a year and responding directly to community concerns. Chairman Bob Buchanan stresses that the condition of the dams in their district and across the state need serious attention.
There are 170 dams in the state of West Virginia, most of which are in emergency status. And that means that they have lived their 50-year plan and they require updating.
The Conservation District has been successfully maintaining those dams for decades.
We do updating and we do maintenance on those dams every year. For 50 or 60 years, the conservation districts have been doing all the maintenance.
Buchanan worries it'll be difficult for a centralized agency to give the dams the same attention without costs ballooning.
What 114 conservation supervisors have been doing for little or nothing is now going to be done by the conservation agency, and you know they're going to have to hire a bunch of people. So it's going to cost the state of West Virginia more money than what it's cost in the past.
Buchanan says his biggest concern is with communication with communities. He says it's easy for residents to get in touch and voice any concerns or issues they have to the local district, and he fears that clear line will be lost with state-level centralization.
What we're worried about is conservation districts being destroyed and lost, and the effect of being able to have that contact for the local citizen gone forever.
According to the Conservation Agency, they are prepared for the transition. Conservation Agency Communications Specialist Davin White says it will largely be a continuation of work the agency already does, inspecting and maintaining dams and responding to high water and flooding as needed.
We have very experienced watershed staff. That includes engineers, engineering technicians, and watershed technicians that will oversee work that we do on these dams. So right now we are very comfortable with where we're at in this transition process.
White says the agency already performs monthly dam inspections and responds right away in emergencies, and will continue doing that when they own the additional dams.
When we have high water rain events, we do dam inspections immediately following those high water rain events. We know the areas most impacted, we know where our dams are in those areas, and we know that they need to be looked at immediately once we've experienced a high water event.
At this time, White says the agency doesn't see a need to add additional staff when they assume ownership of the dams.
If staffing needs need addressed, then that's something that we will always address as the time comes. But where we're at today, you know, we're comfortable with where we are with our experienced staff to handle those issues.
And White says the agency will be happy to work with local districts to fill any gaps.
For many years, you know, about 3 decades, a lot of the technical knowledge about our dams has resided with the agency. When it comes to some historical perspectives about the dams, we would welcome district supervisor input in the information that they could share about the historical perspective of those dams. We would always welcome that.
The transition to Conservation Agency ownership of the dams is to be finalized by July 1st. Chase Campbell, WTAP News.